Conversations with Garmamie. Our guest this time is a Muay Thai competitor, and her name is Jess King. Hello, Jess. How are you doing?
I'm great. How are you doing?
I'm doing good. I'd like to know a little bit about you and your history in the sport, in combat sports, primarily Muay Thai, of course. Tell us what got you into Muay Thai, and what's your history with this combat sport.
Yeah. So oddly enough, so today's actually my daughter's 6th birthday, and
Oh wow! Happy birthday!
thanks.
Yeah.
So she plays a big role in how I got started. So my daughter came into this world very, very early. So she was 12 weeks early. So I ended up spending a lot of time in the hospital with her. Um, and throughout my whole life, I've always been athletic, but I've never done any kind of combat sport. So I played soccer. I was a competitive volleyball player. I played volleyball for my college, but never anything combative. After spending a lot of time in the hospital, I ate pretty much all of my feelings, as one does. And I remember she was about 6 months old, and I was driving by. There was this sign, and it was women's kickboxing. Sign up for your free class. So I thought to myself, I'm like, oh, this will be easy. So I went in, and it was like this private session, and I totally expected like a Taibo situation. It was not. So it was, yeah, we hit pads, and I was like, this is amazing. And I suffered, looking back now, like I think I suffered a lot of post-traumatic stress from the time that I was in the hospital with Molly. But hitting the pads was just this amazing outlet. I gained a lot of weight. So at that point, I weighed in at about 250 pounds. And about a year after Molly had been born, so it was, I think, her first birthday, I had a pretty tough conversation with my dad. And he was like, you need to figure something out here. Like, this is not a healthy way for you to live. I don't want to watch this happen. So I was upset. Obviously, nobody likes to hear that. So I committed to losing 60 pounds.
Wow.
And so I really just dedicated to training. And yeah, all of a sudden that turned into like hill sprints, more time at the gym or the dojo. And then I started sparring. And the first time I sparred, I was like, holy crap, this is amazing. I need to learn if I can compete in this, and I need to know how I can. So at the time I was doing kickboxing, and the gym that I was, or the dojo that I was training out of, Canadian Black Belt Center in Kingston and in Brockville, was a Waco gym. So it was Waco affiliated. So I started competing in Waco. I did my first sanctioned bout in Burlington at Maz. I don't know if you've heard of Maz. I can't say his full name. It's a crazy name, and he is a wonderful man. So I was at his gym in Burlington, and I loved it. And from then on, I just signed up for every tournament, registered for everything I could. I ended up with 8 fights in a year and a half.
Wow.
And I had a provincial championship, which was amazing. I ended my Waco career at 5-3, which was kind of great. And then I kind of hit this point where I was like, I'm ready for something more. Like, I'm ready for a different form of combat, maybe something a little bit more intense. And then I landed into Muay Thai, which I thought would be a really easy transition from like traditional kickboxing. It is not. So yeah, I've been training Muay Thai now for about 2 years, and I'm at Boss in Kempville. I train with crew Yuki Yamanaka and coach Chris Collins, and it's been fantastic.
Can you tell us a little bit about that transition going from traditional kickboxing to what you're doing now, which is Muay Thai?
Whew. Yes. Um, it's been a challenge. It's so funny because I was talking to Yuki about this, but athletics has been like, I've always been athletic, and things have always come pretty natural to me. Um, Kickboxing and Muay Thai have not. It's something, and I think that's why I became so obsessed with it, was because it was so challenging and I constantly had to work. So with kickboxing, I mean, it's more about points. You're not necessarily point sparring because there's still an element of aggression and you certainly do get beat up a little bit. But you're definitely, the touches are a lot lighter and you're really looking like head kicks in Waco are 3 points. And it's more point based, it's fast and light, fast and light, fast and light, where Muay Thai is not that. And even the way, like, just your kicks are so different. Like in kickboxing, it's very karate based. So you're doing a lot of like up kicks, or crescent kicks, things like that. You can get a little fancy. I mean, not to say you can't get fancy in Muay Thai, because you certainly can. But Muay Thai, I always compare like the kicks. So in kickboxing, you're kind of like tapping or kicking up. In Muay Thai, you're chopping through a tree. Like you literally just want to kill your opponent. So that's been fun. Even the stance, like in Muay Thai, you're very much moon. And I think it's because the pace is a little bit different. But yeah, the transition was not as easy. I thought I'd be like, oh yeah, Muay Thai, that'll be fun. I'll start competing in MTO, no big deal. Not the case. It's very different.
Interesting. Now, you mentioned that you also played volleyball in college. This was competitive volleyball, I imagine?
Yeah. So I went to Algonquin in Ottawa, and yeah, played 3 years of competitive volleyball on the varsity team there. It was fantastic. So I played in the OCAA. I was a setter, and yeah, it was awesome. I made some incredible friendships that I still maintain, and I had incredible coaching, and it was like, I grew up in Northern Ontario, so I decided to get as far away from like the life I knew in Northern Ontario, and I like craved diversity and just something different. So I decided to go to Algonquin. Never like had gone to Ottawa. The first day I'd ever been in Ottawa was my first day of school. Didn't know, I knew one person, and that was my cousin. She was going to Ottawa U, and she was like my bosom buddy. Like we grew up together. She was the only person I knew, and we had grown up literally living beside each other our entire lives. And then she ended up living in residence at Ottawa U, and I was, of course, in the West End at Algonquin, and that was the furthest we'd ever been away from each other. So yeah, that's played some ball, and volleyball got me, like, we were lucky enough to explore all of Ontario every weekend because we were at tournaments and games at Humber or Sheridan or wherever. And then usually for Christmas, we would be at some sort of tournament. We were a very good volleyball team. We did very well. We have a provincial bronze medal, and we were always one of the top schools in the province. But yeah, we went to Alberta for a couple of tournaments at Mount Royal. And then my last year, we were able to play in a tournament in Barbados. So we played against it was cool. We played against the national Bayesian team, as well as their club team. And then the University of Montreal was there too. So it was a 4-team tournament rather. But it was, incredible experience.
Really interesting. Can you tell us a little bit about how that experience as a competitive volleyball player, what sort of skills were transferable, if any, to your venture into kickboxing and Muay Thai?
Yeah, so it probably wasn't so much skill. Well, I mean, there are definitely some transferable skills in any sport. I mean, fast twitch muscle movement is a huge thing. And that's something you develop at a super young age. Getting low, just reaction times, I guess. IQ, I mean, there's obviously a fight IQ and a court IQ. The nice thing about volleyball, just like fighting, you don't know what's going to happen on the other side of the court. Like, it's so unpredictable. However, on a volleyball court, there's 6 people, and it takes literally the entire team to make a play. Even like there's at least 3 people that are going to be involved physically in the play, touching the ball. But there's still like defense and offense, and everybody has to be ready. Whereas in fighting, obviously it's on you. But that being said, I think I'm not a very tall person. I mean, I'm average. I think I'm 5'6". I think we lied a couple of times on my roster with shoes. I put my shoe height on. But 5'6" isn't a very tall volleyball player. So I always had to work that much harder to have big ups. So good air if I was blocking. I was not a blocker. Like that was not my strong point. But I was super determined and I worked really hard. And I was never like, I was a strong volleyball player for sure, coming from Northern Ontario. But then getting into the pool in Ottawa, like it was a whole different realm. It was super competitive. And I tried out with girls who had been playing volleyball since they were 5 years old, and they had the opportunity to play on regional club teams, which that was not a thing that I had. So I just worked really, really hard. And my first year, I actually didn't make it on the actual roster of the volleyball team. And I think my coach took me only because I I kept on like making it through the cuts. And then finally it was down to myself and this other girl who ironically was from Kapuskasing, which is not too far from where I grew up. And she was probably like more talented than I was, but I remember this specifically. We were doing this stupid drill and I dove for the ball and I smoked the pole with like my entire body.
Wow.
And I just got up, I shook it off. I'm like, I'm good. And I just kept going. And he's like, okay, like if I don't take this person, I'm going to feel bad. But I also, because he couldn't make it to any of my games. And of course that year, like my team went to OFSA, but OFSA was in Dryden, Ontario, which I don't know if you know where that is.
Don't know where that is.
So it's like 3 hours north of Thunder Bay.
Oh, wow. Wow,
Yeah.
that's far. Holy
Yeah.
moly.
Yeah. And so he's like, yeah, I'm probably not going to make it to your OFSA. No problem, Ev. I'm going to videotape my highlights. So I sent him a VHS that he still has. And I think that was kind of the winning thing. So yeah, I think transferable skills, certainly like beyond fast twitch muscle movement, would be like determination, tenacity, and just like figuring it out as you go.
Yeah, it sounds like those are really important skills for any individual athlete, particularly one involved in the fight game and in combat sports. Now, speaking of combat sports, what was the state of Muay Thai in general pre-COVID? I know you're in the Brockville area, but you train in Belleville. What was that like before this whole COVID nightmare scenario that we're all living?
Yeah, well, interestingly enough, I did a little bit of a gym switch during lockdown 1.0. So I switched from Canadian Black Belt Center, so kickboxing, to a local Muay Thai gym in town, Revelations. And I trained there for a few months. So I had my first, I fought nationals under Revelations, and I also did Art of War with Revelations. There's not in Brockville, like there's a lot of different gyms, but because Brockville is so, I don't want to say we're like so small, but the pool is a little bit different. So the level of competition is a little bit different, and the affiliations with other gyms. So we couldn't just have like a demo with like New Era or Ottawa Fight and Fitness, because the networking was still happening.
Right.
And of course, in Brockville, there's not a lot of women who compete. So I was primarily just training with men. Unfortunately, at my gym, like there was maybe like 5 women who would go to like the fitness women's only kickboxing class, which is fantastic. Like, I think that the beauty of this sport is you can make it it's your own journey, your own adventure. You can do exactly what you want with it. But for me, training just wasn't conducive for what I wanted to do. And not to say like the coaching was there. Our gym was probably more of a jiu-jitsu focused gym, which is also fine. So I think coaching was maybe a little bit green as well. So after Art of War, I had some good conversations with some very trusted advisors. Lewis says hello, by the way.
Hey, what's up, Lewis?
So yeah, I basically it was between like Lewis and my boyfriend, and they're like, if you want to really compete and continue, like you should really find a gym that is going to be able to foster that and help you and is experienced, and you have appropriate training partners, because it was kind of getting to the point where it wasn't always safe. Like I was nervous sparring. I mean, I was
Wow.
coming in at 140 pounds sparring. And I mean, there's a lot of benefits of sparring men, of course. But at the end of the day, it's not realistic. I'm not going to get into a clinch with a 200-pound man. Let's be real here.
Mhm.
Is it going to help me in the ring? Absolutely, for sure. But it's not always realistic. And sometimes you need that level of realism when you are training for a fight. So yeah, Muay Thai, I'd say in Brockville pre-COVID is certainly a new thing. I think Brockville in general is more of like a karate, taekwondo focused area, which is totally cool. However, yeah, lockdown happened. Yuki, who actually refed me in nationals, reached out to me and was like, listen, we're offering Muay Thai online, and we know that you train at Revelations, but at this point, we're all in this together. Let's just get together and support each other and be together and still kind of move. And I did my virtual class with him. I'm like, okay, this is cool. And he's like, well, how'd you like it? And I was like, yeah, it was amazing. And I learned so much from that virtual class that I was just like, what have I been doing with my life? And yeah, then I ended up having that conversation with him about like when things went back to a new normal, what would that look like if I wanted to train with him? And that's kind of, yeah, I kind of went off there. Whew.
No, this is great. This is great. I wanted to know, I think you've kind of answered it already, but in these, like, how are you training these days? Obviously, the pandemic you've answered it. You're doing some virtual training, but to elaborate and give us kind of a picture of your routine as far as your training goes, because it seems like some people are training harder, some people are not training at all. Some people are, sorry, one sec. I think my internet is acting funny. I'm just going to disconnect something here and I'll re-ask you the question. Sorry. It seems to be better now. So how has this pandemic affected your training? I think you've answered it already, but if you can elaborate as to your routine, what you're doing, because it seems some people have stepped up their training. They found new innovative ways, quote unquote, innovative ways to stay fit. And for a competitor like yourself, I suppose the requirements are much higher, right? Obviously, because you're competing, you're not just training for fun necessarily and for
Yeah.
fitness. So if you could elaborate on that, that would be great.
Yeah. So I'm fortunate enough to be involved with a gym that pivoted so well and offered virtual training, which was fantastic. Um, I also have a partner who is pretty well versed in kettlebells. So weight training had never really been a part of my regime. And again, that comes with just not having experienced coaches, just coaches that were more like fitness certified,
Right.
So yeah, I really committed to learning more about weight training and kettlebells. I really committed to cardio. So even now, like throughout the winter, every single morning I wake up and I run 3K, no
Wow.
excuses. I do kettlebells. I do a lot of skipping. But yeah, virtual training was fantastic. And it's so funny because I was talking to Sasha Hijazi not too long ago, and I was asking him because I know he offers similar things with his gym. And I was like, well, how do you find like your turnout for virtual training? Because I felt like this time around the attendance was a little bit lower. And I'm going to be honest, there's a lot of guys, like our virtual training program was very women heavy, which was awesome. I loved it. But I was like, where the guys at? Like we have a lot of competitive men that train at this gym, and we have fantastic fighters. And it's always the same old excuse, like, well, like it's just not the same. Like I'd rather hit pads or a bag. And I get that. Like, believe you me, I love hitting the pads and I love hitting the bag. However, and Sasha said, in a fight, how many shots do you actually connect with? Like, you're missing way more than you're landing. So he's like, virtual training is like the most realistic thing ever. You just don't have a person in front of you. You're just missing shots. And I mean, breaking it down and like shadow boxing essentially has been fantastic because you're really like focusing on technique. I feel like my boxing has never felt tighter. I've really learned, like, I've really focused on like mobility and flexibility and strength. So I do a lot of yoga as well and stretching. And I feel like even my kicks are a lot more powerful. I have like a better turn on my hips. Like, yeah, it's been really nice. Of course, my crew will be the first to tell you that I like to go really intense and I like to go hard, which isn't always good, because now is certainly the time to like slow things down a little bit and really focus in on technique. And fortunately, in this lockdown, as much as it sucks not to train with like your people, it's been probably a huge benefit for me, to just, yeah, break things down and just really focus on fundamentals and technique.
That's interesting. Interesting. Now, how would you describe yourself as a competitor? What keywords would you use? If you were to describe yourself, or even color commentate your own fight, how would you describe your style of Muay Thai,
Well,
or,
it's
or
definitely,
actually your approach to fighting, more broadly speaking? You said
yeah.
you get very intense. I think you just mentioned yeah.
Yeah, I'm pretty intense. Leading up to a fight, I'm always thinking about my opponent. And so like the days that I don't feel like training, I'm like, no, because this person's probably waking up and training and she's not going to out train me. She's not going to last longer in the ring than me. So if I lose this fight, it's because she has outfought me, not because she's outtrained me. Nobody will work harder than me. I like to work really hard, and I think the payoff for me is, I don't know. I like, for me, like, going into a ring is, I love it. It's bananas, but it's the training camp that I love the most because it's just like you have to be so mentally tough. Like for Art of War, I had to cut 15 pounds and I had like 6 weeks to do it. And I was like, I'm doing it. And like when you do that weigh in and you're like, yes, like this, it happened. Like it's the best. As a fighter, when I step into the ring, yeah, I'm very intense. But I try to, it's funny because like when I was kickboxing, like my approach was a lot lighter than it is with Muay Thai. I think it's because there's a lot more to lose in Muay Thai in terms of like getting knocked out. Like that's a thing that can happen. Whereas in Waco, that's not really, unless you were doing like a K1, then that's certainly a reality. I didn't compete in K1. So it wasn't really ever a thing that was on my mind. So it was a little bit lighter, like you do like a little bit of a dance or whatever. We didn't do like a Y or anything like that. But yeah, I'm certainly very intense. I'm always really determined. Um, One of the things though, and it's something that I've been working on a lot with Yuki, uh, is I don't mind taking hits. Like I will take a hit and I'll hit you back. But my defense was really bad. So I'm like one of those, like I'm very aggressive and I'm constantly moving forward. So like a girl could be like just pummeling me. I'm like, no, I'm just go. I'm like a rock'em sock'em robot sometimes. I'm just like, yes, this is happening. And so I have to get out of the mindset of like scoring points all of the time and just kind of dial it back and just focus on being more calculated and becoming a better counter fighter. That's kind of been my goal. So yeah, I'm very aggressive and will just like take all of the hits and be like, I'm okay with this. This is okay, until I lose and I'm like, oh well, guess I should have checked a kick here and there. I don't know.
Interesting. Tell us a little bit about your coach and his history in the sport, and describe him to us as a coach. How would you describe Yuki as your coach?
I'm gonna get all the feels. So Well, I have like I say I have like a tripod of coaches because I do. So there's obviously Yuki, his partner Milena, who I've become very, very good friends with, and Coach Chris. So I actually knew Chris prior to training at Boss. Well, I actually met them all at Art of War, but Chris, I knew when he was at Kempfield Training Center. I'd gone, he invited me to like a little bit of a sparring thing, which was great because there was females there and it was lovely. And he was like, I'm going to coach you one day. And I was like, well, I don't know, maybe. So they all bring something a little bit different to the table. Chris is like a wealth of knowledge when it comes to nutrition and fitness. And he's also very experienced as well. But he's fantastic and he's very like intense. So when you're in his class, it's like go hard all the time, like no excuses. And I love that. Like I like yell at me, make me like hurt. Yuki is also very intense, and I spend a lot of my training is with Yuki. His intensity is a little bit different though. Like it's funny, like when you're like doing something, you're just like, I just want to impress you with my technique. And he's very technique focused. What I love about Yuki, like his IQ, his fight IQ is amazing. Like he's so experienced and he's just so good. Like you watch any fight of Yuki's, it's like the most beautiful thing. Like he is a beautiful fighter. Like yeah, he's long and lean and just calculated and he's so cerebral about all of his movements. Like it's just fantastic. When you spar Yuki, like all you want to do is just kill him because he's so good and he has this teep that just sucks. It sucks so hard. Like it just hurts. What I love about Yuki though is, I mean, beyond who Yuki is, his passion about just Muay Thai in general, like not just like the fighting, but just the spirituality of Muay Thai and like what it means to be like a Thai fighter. And during this last round of lockdowns, he made it his mission to teach us Thai. So we'd take like a few minutes after our Thai class because we'd have like 40 minutes of Thai and then we'd do like 40 minutes of a HIIT class. So he would do, we'd learn Thai. So we learned like general, like Swadika, Kapkunka, Chokdi. We learned how to count to 10, just like different phrases, what the currency was. But yeah, he's just so incredibly motivating and supportive, but he can also critique you in a way that you're like, yeah, like you're so right. Like right now, one of the things that we're working on, and I mentioned, is just slowing things down. And the way he delivered this to me was just, it was so sweet. He's like, I love that you're so intense. And he's like, I love that you like to work hard. And I love like nobody trains harder than you. Like we love that. He's like, but you need to slow down. He's like, it's okay to, and he's like, especially right now, when we're just doing bag stuff, it's okay to just slow down, break things down and work on your technique. He's like, the other things, like when the way we're going right now with like working hard, that work ethic, we can save that for a fight camp. He's like, we're not in a fight camp right now. So yeah, he's great. And then Melina. So she also comes with a ton of experience. I've been fortunate enough, like when things were a little bit sort of open and we were doing dedicated partner training. So she was like my bubble partner, my pad partner, which I was super spoiled with because her technique is ridiculous. But just like Yuki, like she brings so much technique and so much knowledge. She's not like she doesn't love to spar or anything like that, which is totally fine. But she's very good at picking things out and will certainly let me know if my hands drop or anything like that. Like they're just incredible.
Really interesting. Now, I just want to go back to what you mentioned previously about your experience in competitions. Primarily, you said you competed at the nationals as well as at Art of War. Let's start. Let's talk about the nationals. How was that experience for you?
It was awesome. It was kind of funny because I knew a lot of the gyms that compete in Muay Thai also, or like for MTO, will compete in Waco. in Waco's big events. So a lot of it was familiar in terms of the faces and the gyms, which was kind of cool. So I didn't feel like super overwhelmed because I kind of knew what I was getting into. I had competed at Waco Nationals, which was a pretty big event in Niagara Falls. I was obviously, because there's like a few differences in rules, like knees are a thing and clinch is a thing in kickboxing, or at least the stream that I was competing in, that was not a thing. Sealing of the ring I had never done in my life, and I didn't know that was a thing until I actually watched somebody do it. And I looked at my coach and I was like, what's happening and why didn't I know about this? I think he was underprepared. And then going forward, I think that kind of speaks to kind of my time at that gym and why I did switch. But overall, like my nationals experience was just fantastic. My goal was to just stay alive for all the rounds and not get knocked out. And I didn't. And in my head, I was like, if I lose, like, I don't want to lose unanimously. Like, I would love for it to be a split decision. And it was a long split decision. I certainly outboxed my opponent. But I took a lot of kicks, like, and that is when I was like, Jessica should maybe learn how to check a little bit. But yeah, it was a great experience. The only thing that really, really sucked was so we had to weigh in and do our medicals the day before, which is fine. But then we also had to do the exact same thing the morning of the fight, which sucked. Because just when you like make weight, you're like, yes, I can eat.
Right.
No, you cannot. It's like a tease.
Right.
It is a tease.
And it's funny. Did you know that you had to do that additional check the next day? Did your coach tell you, or did you find out? Oh, you didn't know?
No, I found out during the first weigh-in, like during the first weigh-in in medical. Somebody had like mentioned it. They're like, yeah, well, we're going to have to do this tomorrow. I'm like, okay. And then I asked the doctor, I'm like, this is the only one we do, right? And he's like, no, girl. you got to come back tomorrow. I was like, I can't even have coffee. Like, this sucks.
Wow.
He's like, you can have coffee. I'm like, I probably shouldn't. I won't make weight if I have coffee because I'll drink 5 pots. So it's cool.
Yeah, I love coffee as well. Coffee is great. Tell us about your experience at Art of War. How was that?
Oh, interesting. So I don't even know where to begin.
Actually, I know where you should begin. Tell us about the moment you walked into the building. What was going through your mind?
Well, there was a lot happening that day in terms of, so I just I had been filming the docu-series Versus Women in Combat Sports, so that was going on, and of course the production company also films Art of War, so they were there, and we had planned to do some footage of me for the series. So that was like, we're trying to like figure out good times for that. So it was a weird, like, just a weird day overall. Like that morning, my daughter had a hockey tournament. Wow. And she's like a Timbit hockey player. So I went to that, but I was like, my ex-husband, we were really good friends, but he saw me, he's like, Jesus, you look terrible. And I was like all sunken in, and I was like, well, yeah, like I have to make weight. And so I'm sitting there watching my daughter play hockey, and I was like, I wonder what the other parents are doing after the game. Like, probably gonna go have a pizza party. What are you doing, Jessica? Oh, I'm just gonna go into a ring and beat somebody up, typical Saturday. So I made it to Ottawa. We get to the War Museum, and then immediately I have to kind of find Derek and Emily and Jeremy from Obscure Creative. I get weighed in, and I have this habit. I don't know if it's a habit or I don't know what it is, but anytime I'm weighing in for any of my fights, I seem to always weigh in with my opponent.
Really?
Now, Art of War is like a little different because it's like a smaller card. It's not nationals or whatever. And on this particular card, there was only 2 female fights. So, I mean, the likeliness of me having to run into her was very high. So, and she had really cool avocado socks, which was nice. Um, so I weighed in, and then again, it was just kind of like, as I'm getting weighed in, like my coach is checking in, and of course he doesn't have his papers. Which like immediately I'm like, how do you not have your papers, right? Like how? And
Yeah.
so he's like blaming the world of Muay Thai Ontario. It was just a mess, and I was like, shit, like what's gonna happen now?
Wow.
So luckily I had a second, and he had everything in check. So this guy, my second, had never cornered a fight in his life, and he's like my training partner essentially, which was fine. He did a great job, sort of, for not knowing what he did. So yeah, like I think that kind of set the tone for the rest of the day, because it's like it's like one of those things. It gets kind of like you're thrown off, right? You're like, what's gonna happen? Like we had kind of a strategy, but anyways, I just kind of like it was such a fantastic opportunity, and I just uh I just kind of took it all in. Like it was amazing. Like the venue was just fantastic. And I was really nervous. I have to say, like, so I saw Lewis, like Lewis commentated, which I don't think was like the easiest thing for him to commentate my fight, especially how it ended, but that's okay. But seeing him was like fantastic because I was like, okay, good, like a familiar face. And so we chatted a little bit, and that put me at ease. But then like people I knew started showing up. They had bought tickets, and like you've been to Art of War, so like changing, like the fighters are like sharing the bathroom with like the public. So you're like walking through in your Thai stuff, and like people know that you're fighting, and they're talking to you, and it's great. My parents, like my mom came from New Liskard, which is 8 hours away, and my brothers, and they had never watched me fight or train or do
Wow.
anything. They had no idea what this was. No
Wow.
idea.
That's awesome.
Yeah, well, awesome in the sense that they came to support, but then after like the next day, I went and had coffee with them, and like I was pretty beat up, and my mom's like, never again, never again.
Wow.
She's like, I can never do that again. And I get it.
Yeah, it's tough for parents, right? For especially in combat sports, you see your child getting in there fighting, and if they themselves, even if they have if they have a background in these sports, I think it's still it would still be challenging for them. But so sorry, please continue.
No, well, yeah. So it was just everything was happening, and there's people I knew. I was like, oh my gosh. So there's so much pressure to perform. Like you want to. At that point, I was like, well, if I don't win, I know like I worked so hard, and I know that the people that are here, like my former colleagues came, like it was a lot. I was like, they know that I've put in the time and that I've worked really hard. I'm like, I hope I can just deliver like a really entertaining and good fight. And so for me, like Art of War, any other fight I've had, so the 9 fights previous to Art of War have all been tournament fights. So the only other people there are other fighters and their gyms, right? I've never fought on like a show card. And that in itself is like kind of a different mentality. Cause like for me, anyways, I was like, oh, I really hope that I like give them their money's worth, which is such a weird thing. You're like, I want to do so well for you. Where at nationals, you're like, I just like it'd be cool to win a medal, and like I just want to bring something home and be like, I worked really hard for this, and I won a silver or whatever, or I made Team Canada or whatever it is. But with this, it's like there's ring girls, and there's music, there's walkout music. That was pretty dope. So yeah, it was so much more than just the fight.
Were
Yeah.
sorry to interrupt, but were you intimidated by that because it was your first time in that sort of atmosphere?
Oh, 100%. Yeah. And just intimidated. And the girl that I fought, Olivia, who is like lovely. I'd read up a little bit on her, but it's interesting because and now like training with Yuki and Chris and Milena, so Vinny Perron was on that card as well. So we were both red corner. We have matching shorts, and sometimes we may or may not coordinate our outfits to train. But his fight camp and my fight camp for Art of War were so different. He knew so much. He was so much more prepared than I was. Like for me, I was trying to get as much information of this girl as I could. And I felt like it was like, yeah, whatever, Jess, like just put your blinders on and you do you. I'm like, yes, okay. However, I think it's really important to maybe look at like what we can from this girl, so we kind of have a strategy. Like that kind of seems important. And I had known that her last fight, she had TKO'd her opponent. But I didn't know how she TKO'd, and I didn't know her style of fighting. All I knew is she was from Loyalist. I knew that gym was really strong. I had sparred a couple of women from that gym. I was doing she spars when I was still competing in kickboxing. So I would drive to like Mississauga and go to Combat Arts and do a she spars, which was amazing. And then also too, like the headline or like the main event fight for Art of War was Jordan Graham, who trains out of Loyalist. And I was like, I feel like maybe this could be of concern. Like she's coming from his gym. They probably trained together, like probably important. There's also, they have another female fighter at that gym who I think is on Team Canada. I forget her first name, but I follow her on Instagram, and she's just, her and her boyfriend, I think, are both like very competitive, very talented fighters. So yeah, like it was super overwhelming and scary. And I think I just felt a little underprepared, and I was just so sad. Like it ended in a TKO. A lot of people think it was a pretty quick stoppage. Like they think the ref stopped it. Well, the ref stopped it a little too soon. And I would agree with that. But I was not winning that fight. Like there was no way I could have come out of like watching the fight. I was like, yeah, I would have lost it. Like she was just a monster. Like her hands, and that's like one of the things too. Like I never ever get out boxed, and I feel like boxing is what I go to when I feel like things are not going well for me. I'm like, I'm gonna come at you with my fists ablazing, because that's going to throw you off and you're gonna get nervous because you're not gonna know what to do. That's usually kind of my game plan, but I couldn't with her. Like she was this tiny little robot of just hands. Like she was incredible, and they were heavy, very heavy.
Now I have a two-part question. If you obviously had a really interesting experience. It was your first time in this sort of atmosphere, and you sound generally positive about all of it. But if I can ask you, if you could go back and reassess your approach in your fight, what would you do different? And in addition to that, if you could go back and work on things outside of the ring before the fight, in terms of maybe like, sometimes it's having a support staff. It's not a support staff, but having a crew of people, be it coaches who keep you focused and keep you, away from all those distractions. I guess I don't want to be answering the question for you, but what would you do different in regards to all of that noise before the fight? And what would you do different in regards to that particular fight with that opponent?
Yeah, that's a really good question.
I guess it's more, sorry, I guess in terms of lessons learned, what's the takeaway from the fight, and how is that changing your approach in fighting? I think you've kind of answered it already, but
yeah, no, that's okay. I think if I were to do it again, I certainly would be going in better prepared. My training would have been completely like the training I was doing for fight camp. First of all, like the weight cut I did, like this whole fight camp I did for Art of War was completely solo, and I was just kind of doing what I thought made sense. So I knew that if my cardio was really, really good, I'd last in the ring, because that's like always been my thing too. I'm like, nobody is ever going to beat me on cardio, because I don't like feeling tired in a fight. Nobody does. And it's going to happen. but it's like the worst feeling ever. But even just like nutrition wise, like the things that I was putting, not that like I'm really conscious about what I eat on a regular basis anyway. But I certainly could have cut the weight in a more healthy manner than I did. But also too, like knowing what I know now, especially just training with a different group of people, that would have been a complete game changer. Like I would love to have a rematch right now. Like it would just be, and even it's funny, like with Versus, like they have footage of me training with Sasha, because I actually had a private session with Sasha, and that's kind of how Art of War happened. Then they have footage of me at Revelations, and then of course footage of me with Yuki. And Derek, one of the producers, is like, Jess, like we were editing and we are looking at your stuff, and he's like, you're completely different, like two different fighters.
Wow.
So I think,
Sorry, how so? Can you elaborate as to how you were different in the footage that?
basic technique stuff, like, and just like I've always had, like, again, like pretty strong boxing, but my technique, like I became a Thai fighter, you know, like I went from a very stand up straight kickboxer, very point based, fast and light, to like a pretty strong, like hunched over. I mean, I'm still working on the hunch because I do get upright every so often, and then my whole liver is exposed, which is not good. But yeah, just like basic kicks, just like swinging my arm on a like on a rear kick, you know, checking, making miss, like just those things. Like we never, training camp for me for Art of War like didn't really involve a lot of focused drills, where Yuki is all about the drills. Like we do kick back as a warm up, and then and now I do kick back with my daughter who started training and she loves it. But yeah, like we just, everything we do with Yuki is purposeful, whereas in my fight camp, and not to take anything away from Revelations, because I think they're doing really great things for the people in Brockville who want to do this recreationally. And I think, again, I think they're more jujitsu focused. And I have to give a shout out. There's actually this young girl at Revelations who is a BJJ competitor, and she is fierce and she does so well. She goes and competes as much as she can, and her name's Olive, and she's just awesome, super talented. But unfortunately, like that, just the way they approach their fights for jiu-jitsu, I don't think is super transferable to how they do in Muay Thai. And I think it's just an experience thing. So for me, like training, it felt very much like, okay, like we're going to do these combos, but it was not directed just at me, which is fine. And then even when we sparred, it was mostly like anytime I felt like I was sparring during my training camp, like I just kind of felt like I was showing up and people were just going like, literally it was, all right, Jess has a fight coming up, be tough on her, you know, like hit her hard. And that's not really the right approach. Like I don't want to go in concussed, like, you know, like it's cool.
Yeah.
And like there's certainly an element of training hard, but unfortunately, and I've said this so many times, especially in Brockville, because again, experience is lacking. Sparring isn't about knocking the other, like this is your teammate, you know, you're sparring, you're learning, you're trying to figure stuff out. Save that shit for the fight. I'm sorry, I don't know if you can swear.
Oh yeah, you can swear, of course.
Okay. But like, yeah, like save that for the fight. Like sparring is training, you know? And I always say to people, like, I spar far differently than I fight. Like fighting, you are not a person to me until after, and then we'll be friends and I'll probably follow you on Instagram or whatever. But yeah, it was just very much, anytime I showed up, I kind of felt like, is this going to be the night where my knee gives out? Is this going to be the night where I, you know, get a concussion? Like, and I feel like when you're in a training camp, that shouldn't be anything you ever think about. And that was a huge catalyst. Like we would talk about like training after, and Aaron's awesome and like super supportive. And yeah, that was basically the catalyst of us having the conversation of, you know, like if you want to continue this, he's like, I really can't support you fighting if you're going to train in this environment. He's like, you need to, if you want to take this seriously, you have to get serious about your training. And maybe that means you commute a few extra minutes and find a gym in Kempville or Ottawa, and just get safer training environments, and also like go into the ring and be more prepared. And yeah, so it just, oof, it's a lot. It was a tangent.
No, it's great. It's really interesting. You're getting a lot of, I think, great advice from people who care, because they're talking about in terms of concussions, head trauma, and all that, and finding coaches that will refine your technique and augment your overall performance in ring. I think that's what there's a strong need for solid coaching in all sports, quite frankly. Now, in from the top, you mentioned what motivated you to get into Muay Thai. If we can go back, or combat sports in general, obviously it was established from your history and other competitive sports.
Yeah.
Let's go back and talk about motivation, particularly how do you know when you're giving your best? Because from just speaking to you now, it sounds like you're a very you know enthusiastic, intense person who's very um, you got a lot of energy is what I'm saying. But how do you know when you're giving 101%?
Uh,
Not 100%, but
yeah,
101.
physically, I'm like exasperated. Just like I need to feel like I am dying. I always tell Yuki that I need to feel uncomfortable. So he makes it his goal to make me feel uncomfortable, and I love it. So if there's like a point in training, and it doesn't have to be through the whole session, but there's generally a point or a period of time where we're doing something and I am uncomfortable. Um, yeah, that means that like I know that this is happening, and that's not just like physically uncomfortable. Like there are things that we will do that make me super mentally uncomfortable. For example, there's this drill, and I always say to Yuki, I know this is a good drill because I hate it so much,
Mm.
and it's the simplest drill ever, and it's literally it's one person, well there's two, but you start, so one person is fighting forward and the other person is fighting backwards, and then you just switch, you go from one end of the gym to the other and you switch back and forth. So one person is always on defense, the other person is always on offense, and I hate it. I don't know why. I just don't like it. I'm fine going forward because I think that's what I'm most comfortable doing, but I hate going backwards.
Mm.
Hate it. Hate, but it's such an important skill, right? And it's such a basic skill. So there's that. And then there's another one, and it makes me so mentally uncomfortable. I've almost cried, where Yuki will call out, so you spar essentially, but it's drill sparring. So one person is using their lead hand, the other person is using, or sorry, their lead body parts, so lead hand, lead leg, only, and the other person is using their rear only. That sucks. I hate it. So anytime where, yeah, like physical exhaustion, obviously, and we started doing, they're called the Icemans, and it's like a bunch of ab exercises. I do them at home now, but it's from Terrio's gym. And Iceman used to do, because that's what he was called, right? It was the Iceman.
Yeah.
He would do these ridiculous core exercises in his fight camp, and they hurt so much. So yeah, anytime I feel like physical, any type of like uncomfortableness, whether it be physical or mental, I know that I've given it 110%.
In
I feel,
addition to all the training, from even, I think you mentioned you do some yoga as well.
yes, yeah.
Like, what other sort of exercises, and I don't necessarily mean, or routines do you do in terms of preparing mentally when it comes to focus and not so much discipline, because you are disciplined, you're training, but what other modalities are you experimenting with when it comes to the sports psychology aspect of combat sports?
Yeah, that's a really good question. So I do keep a couple of journals. So I have a fight journal, a training journal. And I basically use that for training. So to keep track of like the things that I've worked out, and just like the routines I've been doing. But I also in there will write, especially after like any class or private sessions that I have with Yuki, I'll write down like how I'm feeling or what I need to work on. In addition to that, though, I also have like just a journal because I think journaling is really, really important. Something I learned in college, which is kind of an interesting, well, it's not interesting, but it's actually, I listened to this on another podcast too, and it's something that Michael Phelps did. However, we kind of took it down like 15 steps from what he did, but it's visualization. So when I played volleyball, like we would sit in our team room and we would visualize the game, and it would start at the serve. So we would literally call out the person who would normally be the first person to serve when we won the serve, and we would call out plays. However, the way we visualized it, although this is like a super great thing to do because you're obviously it's very positive, but that was just it. Like it was very positive, and it was visualizing all of the things that we wanted to happen rather than realistic outcomes that would happen. Where like Michael Phelps, for example, he won and broke a ton of records due to a visualization exercise. Like there was one, I forget which, I think it was in Beijing, I think. Oh, I hope I'm not sounding ridiculous here, but his goggles filled up with water within like seconds of diving in, and he couldn't see, but then he just smashed a whole bunch of records because he had visualized that situation happening. So he had actually, like in training, he knew how many strokes it would take for him to get to the end and back and what it should feel like. But he had visualized that outcome. Wow. It's insane. So I think visualization is super important. Right now, obviously, it's pretty hard because we can't spar. We're pretty dedicated to our bag and our bag only. Mm-hmm. But often, like I will visualize, like especially shadow boxing. I mean, that's great. I always pretend it's always my last opponent too. So sorry, Olivia, but you are my person that is in front of me, and I'm always thinking about Art of War and that fight and how like, okay, well, she came at me with this, like what would I do in this situation? How do I get, she put me in the corner so many times. She had basically almost threw me out of the ring at one point. So it's like, how do I get out of that? Right. Obviously I need to work on my footwork and like, yeah. So I visualize a lot.
That's fascinating. What are your goals? I should have asked you this from the top. What are your goals in this game of competing and fighting in Muay Thai? What are you visualizing for yourself, like in the next, couple of years, hopefully when this pandemic is over and you're back at competing? What are your goals?
Well, I'd like to win a Muay Thai fight. I'm 0-2 in Muay Thai land right now. I don't know. Like, I think Aaron asked me this a while ago too. And because I'm getting older, like how old am I? I'm 32. So I'll be 33 in October, which I know is not, I know. But in fight world, it's not young. So I don't know how much time I have left. Hopefully a long time. Yeah, I mean, I just want to see where this journey, like I want to still continue to compete as long as I can. As long as I'm healthy and like knock on wood, injury free. I don't know. Like, I think I wouldn't mind coaching. Like I was coaching. So I was coaching high level volleyball. I was coaching for a club team here in Brockville, and went on to do a regional program with Team Ontario, which was kind of great. And I think I would really enjoy, I don't know if I'd want to be like the lead corner for a fight, but I would certainly like to be a second. And I think that it's interesting that we talked a little bit about psychology, because I think that's something that I would really like to learn more about, because it's very interesting to me. And I think it's a really important thing that often gets missed. Like we focus so much on the physical aspects of competition, being in amazing shape, being able to sustain a fight with cardio or whatever. But nobody talks a lot about like the mental aspects of it. And especially with fighting, I mean, it can be a mind F. Like it's a lot. I met like Art of War, like the next day, I was not okay. Like I went to a yoga class and we actually so I had also booked a scotch and chocolate tasting the next day at Deacon Brody's in Ottawa, which was amazing. And we went with Lewis. But prior to that, I went to a yoga class and I just cried on the mat. Like I was just,
Wow.
and I was like, what's happening to me? Like I was just in the moment and it just let it happen. I just went with it. But yeah, I think I would really be interested in getting into that. But I think for the next like several years, I still want to compete, which kind of scares me a little bit because I know as I compete, my classes will change. And I don't know if I'd want to compete in like A class at 37. Like, I feel like that would be a little bit scary. I think I like shin guards a lot.
That's awesome. When you mentioned you cried in yoga class, was that throughout the class? Was that in a particular moment? What did the yoga instructor do when you cried? Like what?
Oh, I don't think he noticed. It was a pretty
Uh,
full class.
okay.
And it wasn't like bawling. Like it
Oh,
wasn't,
okay.
it was just like silent weeping.
Wow. Wow.
Yeah, it was weird. It was just like I think we are just kind of in vinyasa. That's what you're just like on your back, just kind of chilling. And it just kind of started, it happened. And I think I was just overwhelmed by the last 24 hours that I had had. And it needed to come out.
Okay. So
But
it's
there's
like a
also,
release of emotion,
yeah,
essentially, after the fight, and yeah, that's fascinating. What's interesting too is you partook in in this docu series. Speak to us about that whole experience, having this incredible crew of storytellers capture your training and so on. How was that experience?
oh, it was amazing. Have you seen like season one?
I have, but I haven't seen the recent one.
Okay, yeah. See, well, if you're a Bell 5 subscriber, it's free right now, but stay tuned because it should be available to everybody very soon. Um, it was incredible. They changed things up a little bit. So last season, the first season, they did 2 fighters per episode. So they were pretty quick. And this season, they just did 1 fighter per episode. So there were 6 of us. Um, there was a lot of like, they did such a great job. Obviously, like the whole filming process was prolonged because of the pandemic. And unfortunately, like none of us have really met each other in real life,
Wow, wow,
which is really unfortunate. However, we've kind of like, we had this little virtual community, which is kind of great. And Layla, who fights out of New Era, we obviously have a lot of common contacts and mutual friends. So we've been chatting a little bit. And yeah, it was just a really incredible experience. And also just knowing that there was like 5 other badass females that, and not all of us do Muay Thai. Like there's jujitsu and wrestling and Taekwondo. Like, yeah, it's just women in combat sports. Like it's such a, I think it's growing so quickly, which is really exciting, but also like the opportunities don't seem to be growing as quick as the interest is, if that makes sense. But I think that might change, especially in the pandemic, hopefully, or after the pandemic. But then, so watching season 1, so I got cast in season 2. I watched season 1 because I was like, what did I just sign up for? And I was like, oh shit, like I don't know if I'm qualified for this, because it was like Taylor McClatchy, Amy Reed, like serious, like Roshan, like these women are fierce. So I was like, oh my gosh. So yeah, but it was really cool. Jeremy and Emily and Derek are fantastic. Anything they do and touch is just gold. Like they're so genius when it comes to shooting anything. And yeah, they did a really great job of not just like telling my story, but telling all of our stories, and not just focusing on us as a fighter, but like focusing on us as like human beings, like outside of the ring. And like a lot of us are parents, and most of us have jobs, and it's like balancing all of that. It was cool.
Just want to go back to your comment you were saying earlier on that the opportunities aren't catching up. Just can you elaborate on that? What you were saying?
Yeah. Like, well, I feel like any card, like any fight card that happens, like there's usually only like two female
Oh,
fights.
yeah, right.
Um and it's not, I don't know, I don't think it's because that the opportunity for the women to fight isn't there, because I think that any person putting on, or any promoter would gladly accept female fighters. But I think women just don't, I don't know. It's a weird thing. I think it's a lot of the time women are like nervous to get in the ring. They don't know. Like it's like ripping off the band-aid. They're just like, ah. So you generally, it seems to be that there's one female who's like, yeah, let's do this, let's do this. And then there's this other opponent and it's going to happen. And then one of them backs out. And I feel like fights fall through for women a lot. I'm sure they do with men as well.
Mhm.
But yeah, and also too, there's a lot of women that are competitive. But I feel like in Eastern Ontario, it's maybe not the same kind of pool. Like I feel like the pool for competitive women is a little bit less. Um, Most women, at least the ones that I've seen, they're all incredible and have the ability to compete if they wanted to, but they seem to be more comfortable just doing it recreationally and on the pads, which is totally fine. But it just means that the women that are competitive and are looking to fight need to travel to find the fights, right? So it's not like people are, I mean, I think Ottawa has really blown up in terms of Muay Thai. There's some fantastic fighters and there's amazing gyms. I mean, like Ottawa Fight and Fitness has some fantastic fighters. And one has some, like, like New Era. There's Awama. I mean, it's a mecca, which I think is really great. And I hope that more females, I think there's a lot of young women are like, let's do this. Like even my daughter, so she's 6 and she's in Muay Thai, she's training. And Yuki and I started kind of having the conversation about Molly competing. And he's like, well, would you want her to? I was like, heck yeah, I would. So then I like approached the subject with Molly and she's like, well, I don't know. Like, I don't want to punch anybody. I'm like, yeah, you do. You want to do that. I'm like, I'm not going to force you, Molly, but do you like playing kick, kick back? And she said, yeah, I love playing kick, kick back. I'm like, well, it's like that, except you use everything.
That's awesome. I have one last question for you. Thank you very much for your time, by the way. This has been a really,
Oh, thank you for having me. This has been great.
yeah, this has been a fun conversation. Very interesting. What's the best advice you've ever been given? It can be combat sports related or not, but what's the best advice you've ever been given?
Yeah. Okay. So I actually have two things. So in college, my coach, Everton Senior, still coaching, by the way, he is fantastic. He was probably, yeah, he was a coach that was a life-changing coach for me. Really opened the doors to a lot of different things. And yeah, he was amazing. But I remember one day, and it was something that he would consistently say throughout my time at Algonquin, or anytime I needed to hear it, I felt like he said it. And it's a famous quote, really. But it's, you control your own destiny. And I know it's kind of like cheesy a little bit, but it's true. Like, and that's one of the things, like when I wake up and I think about my opponent who's probably running and training, I'm like, well, heck yeah, I'm getting on that train too. Like I have a choice to train or not train. I control that. Nobody else controls that.
Mhm.
I control that. So I control whether or not I go for that run, or I control whether or not I eat that piece of chocolate or drink that glass of wine or get into the ring or change my career. So yeah, you control your own destiny is certainly, that's something that's like resonated with me. And I mean, it's maybe a little bit redundant in a pandemic because I feel like we don't really control much of anything right now within reason. But you can certainly pivot and adapt, and you can control your reaction, right? So yeah, this like global pandemic has happened, and it's a serious situation, and it's affected everybody. But you can choose how it affects you and how you pivot and what you do with it. You can choose to, like for me, I chose to look at other options for training, and I did it. And then the other thing, it was actually a recent thing that Yuki had said, and it was in a class that we had. So our social, he has it set up right now. The gym's awesome, but we each have like a box and a bag, and you're in your box for the whole class. It's great. And so you're very socially distant. We're all masked. It's fantastic. Anyways, it was a very tough class, and a lot of people were like starting to whine or whatever. And he said, when you think you're done, when you think you are totally done, you still have 40%. You still have 40% left in that tank. And so now when I'm like running, because I'm going to be honest, like I hate running. I think running sucks. It is the worst, but I do it. It's so boring. But it's also like, it can be very therapeutic. But there's this point in my run, it's like my last 500 meters. And I'm usually pretty tired at that point. I haven't really been like pacing my runs for the winter because I don't want to slip and fall and die. So I try to like be a little bit careful. However, there's this 500-meter part where it's King Street in Brockville. I'm a King Street toughie. Yeah, I sprint the road. Like I sprint down the road because it's usually clear and relatively safe. And I don't want to do it, but I think of these words every single time I do it. I'm like, Jessica, you have 40% left. You have 40%. You can do this. You can do this for 500 meters. You can do hard things. And so that's resonated with me as well.
That's awesome. That's really incredible. 40%. I've never heard that expression before, but the next time I'm doing something that's really, challenging or tough, I'll think of that quote. Thank you very much for your time. This has been a lot of fun, and all the best. I hope to see you fight once this pandemic is over, and all the best in your training.
Thank you. Thank you so much for having me.